waters.
I love to have so many waters. God, I love water. Thank you all for being here. This means quite a lot to me. This state is where I went to college, and most people in this audience know that, and went to college with me. And it's just like so beautiful to see you here. So thank you so much for coming. I love you all very much. And for folks who I have not met and I'm just seeing now, thank you for being here as well. Like, these events are always, I don't know, sparsely attended, and to see like, a good chunk of people here in these folding chairs, it makes me very happy. Okay, so I'm going to read. Annie, do I have how much time do I have to read?
You have all the time you want.
All kinds of time. Okay, cool. I'm gonna
try to be moving on to signing at around 8.
Around 8?
I'll give you a wave.
Okay.
If you guys haven't moved on to, if you haven't stopped reading in the next 40 minutes, I'll move on.
I just go on and on and on and read the whole book. Okay, let me go ahead and find where I want to read from.
Is it okay to take a picture of you?
Sorry.
Can I take a picture?
Oh, yes. Oh, my God. Liz, hi. For a second, I didn't recognize you with your mask on. I love your hair so much. Yes, it's okay if you take a picture of me. That would make me very happy. Oh, here we go. Okay. So, at this point in the novel, if you're not familiar with the premise of the novel, this is about gay con men, Orson and Ezra. It's narrated by Ezra, who's this sort of nebbish, small man, and Orson is this chiseled Adonis, whom he's obsessed with. Ezra and Orson start doing these sort of small cons, and working their way up to what ends up being a billion-dollar enterprise called New Life. But I'm going to read to you from the small con section, and this is a honeypot scheme that they kind of perpetrate here, with Orson as the bait. So I will just share that little introduction with you, and then I'll go ahead and read. We had a new plan. According to my fake ID, my name was Thornton Weston. I was a Yale-educated aspiring filmmaker who had yet to go to film school. I wanted to be the next Martin Scorsese, but I was an inveterate partier, too drunk and high all the time to even bother thinking about continuing my education. I dressed in ratty t-shirts and black jeans because I was embarrassed by my family's wealth. On a rainy Thursday night, I took my ID to Torrent, a club in the city center where the cover was $50. I parked myself at the bar and ordered a Mai Tai, pretending to be texting a crush, my mouth screwed up in the kittenish pout of a harmless gay man. As I'd expected, 2 strangers walked up to me, one in a tight lycra dress and the other in cheetah print heels. Are these seats taken? The one in the lycra dress asked. No, I said, feel free. Cheetah print was named Selena and lycra was named Marta. Selena had just dumped her boyfriend and Marta was treating her to a night out. They were on the lookout for a rebound for Selena. I rested my chin in my hand, eyeing them both as though this were the most delicious piece of information I'd ever heard. I leaned forward. Between you and me, I'm on the lookout for a new guy myself. They both laughed. Selena ordered us shots. Then Marta ordered us shots, and I followed suit. Now we have to dance, Thornton, Selena crowed over the music. We're all drunk, so we have to dance. I made a show of protesting, but ultimately let them pull me onto the dance floor, where I demonstrated that I had more rhythm than I think either of them expected. They chorused, woos, and clapped. Dancing had always been easy for me. I was small and flexible, and didn't need to see to know how to move to music. With perfect sight came self-consciousness and distance from sound. I didn't have those problems. I watched their feet close to mine, their heels narrow and delicate like spiders' legs. Unlike me, they were only capable of limited movement, and this was a good thing. I spun them, dipped them, allowed them to pirouette. We attracted a small fandom on the floor, people clapping and cheering for us as we danced. When it was done, we were all sweaty and breathless. Selena and Marta grabbed my hands in delight. You're so fun, Thornton, Marta said. You have to meet the rest of our friends. Unsurprisingly, Selena and Marta had friends as beautiful and rich as they were, with names like Kaylee and Haley and Madison. I should note here that Kaylee and Haley are spelled with an L-E-I-G-H. Just a little detail. It took a few weeks, but I was soon spending every night with them at Kaylee's apartment, getting drunk and watching Real Housewives, or rolling on Molly and telling each other how pretty we all were. They were all young and long-haired and supple-limbed, but worldlier than I wanted them to be. They had been through difficult breakups with men with powerful fathers, many of whom were local celebrities. They were savvy and skeptical of all men. I was beginning to doubt my ability to implement our plan, until I met Jamie DeCroix, a friend of Marta's who joined us in Kaylee's apartment one Friday. Jamie was the daughter of a Wall Street hedge fund manager who had given her free rein to pursue an acting career several thousand miles away from him. She stayed in a condo her father had purchased for her and spent her money on anything that struck her fancy: coats, shoes, champagne, drugs. She was beautiful in a way that was almost threatening, and it was precisely because of this beauty that she, like Ingrid's friend Alice, struggled to maintain a boyfriend. No one felt they deserved her, so they dismissed her, called her names, cheated on her. She needed someone who wouldn't be threatened by her beauty. "My friend Troy is coming to town," I said one night while The Bachelor was flickering across Kaylee's plasma screen. "It's actually a pretty crazy story how I met him." "You tell the best stories, Thornton," Haley purred. "I know," I said, and smiled. I had an internship in D.C. my junior year at Yale, and every day I had to walk to Capitol Hill to do some stupid paperwork. And there was this busker sitting on the sidewalk. He was super sweet and, super cute, but he doesn't roll that way, of course. Everyone laughed. So, he would always play Hallelujah whenever I walked past, and I'd always give him, $15. And one day I gave him my number and told him to call me if he ever came out here, and he just called me last night. "Oh my God," Selena said, and looked at Jamie. "We're going to get to meet him?" They were. Orson had shaved his head to play Troy, and wore the desperate-to-please smile of the formerly homeless. He dressed in a Canadian tuxedo and scuffed work boots. On the first night he came out with us, he stayed at the bar drinking seltzers and telling Jamie that his dad had been a violent alcoholic, so he'd run away from home at 15. He never sized her up, never commented on how good she looked. Jamie never looked away from him as he spoke. I hadn't known Orson could actually play the guitar, but of course he could. At Jamie's condo, he played Hallelujah and then covers of Katy Perry and Beyonce. Anything we threw at him, he could magic into a simple chord progression. And I got so drunk, Selena and Marta had to package me into a taxi and send me to the fake address I gave them. By the time I got there, I had sobered up enough to walk home, my hands in my pockets, grimacing against an unusually biting wind. I didn't like the next part of the plan. Orson had to hook up with Jamie. It was necessary, but it made my muscles knot to think about it. It would have been too awkward to ask him to be reserved, to not give an ounce of himself to her, to do everything mechanically and be done with it before she finished. I knew how it had to happen. He had to go all out. The thought disgusted me. I told myself it wasn't real with her. It couldn't be real with her. It was only real with me. "Oh my God," Jamie called me the next morning. "Thornton." "Quieter," I said, cotton-mouthed. "Sorry, oh my God, sorry," she laughed. "You must be so hungover." "Yep, I really am. What's up?" "Troy and I hooked up last night. It was fucking incredible." I had to muster enthusiasm. That was key. "Oh my God, girl." She laughed too loudly and for too long. "I think I'm literally in heaven right now. How did you find this Adonis?" "Fuck you," I thought. "I swear I just attract beautiful men," I said. She laughed again. "You really do, honey. Wow." Orson spent every night at Jamie's, and she paid for everything. New clothes, new shoes, dinners out. I missed him, but I liked seeing him in brand-name clothes when he got home every morning. And I knew he was mine during the day. I knew that Jamie would never know him like I did. How could she? To her, he was Troy, a fictional once homeless busker who wanted to become a professional musician. Troy told Jamie that he would love to get just 10 minutes in a recording studio. He could really show those producers who he was. Jamie listened to his album in progress, which just happened to be about a wake-up-to-you girl with sun-shocked curls. She cried a little as he played. Was it about her? She wanted to know. Yes, of course it was. He was in love with her. A few months in, he sheepishly admitted that he wanted to record in private before taking anything to a professional studio. But, unfortunately, that would require his own space and his own equipment, which he just didn't have. Jamie flashed a bleached smile and wagged her sun-shocked curls and told him it was no problem. She actually knew a place in her same neighborhood that she was considering buying anyway. Her dad wanted her to invest because renting was just throwing money away. Would Troy like to live there? She would buy it and he could stay there. She just wanted him to be happy. Troy cried. This was the first time anyone had really seen him. This was the first time he'd really been taken care of. He promised to love Jamie for the rest of her life. She bought the condo, which was worth close to $1 million, and filled it with recording equipment. He recorded a demo of his album, Love and Grace, and was all ready to show it to producers when he got cold feet. He began to have nightmares. He lost his interest in sex. He was depressed, and there was nothing Jamie could do to cheer him up. So she paid for therapy, and Troy was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, and he was placed on an SSRI that he cheeked and spit into the toilet. At therapy, Orson was a model patient in every way, except when it came to telling the truth. He told the therapist Troy's story, and the therapist listened and offered coping strategies and asked him how those coping strategies made him feel. He told her that the deep breathing and meditation were really helping, as was the medication, but he couldn't get over how fundamentally unhappy he was in his relationship. I keep having this dream, he told her, where I'm looking in this chest of drawers for something I've lost, and there's nothing in there, but I keep thinking it'll turn up. I don't even know what I've lost, but I'm desperate to find it. I look and I never find anything. And then right before I wake up, I find this tarantula the size of my hand. Does it scare you? The therapist asked. He shook his head. It's weirdly comforting. I let it crawl all over me. And when it bites me, I just feel this wave of relief, like, it can finally all be over now. The therapist doubled his dosage. He spent nights watching TV on Jamie's laptop while she stroked his hair and promised in a thin voice that he'd definitely start feeling better soon. Then it was a waiting game. Someone as beautiful and rich as Jamie couldn't go months without sex, and she couldn't bring herself to pressure Troy into anything. He was too perfect, and she'd feel too guilty. She called me and asked if I had any advice. He's just so sad. He's not himself. All he does is sit around and watch TV and cry. Babe, you know he's had a traumatic life, I said. But I'm giving him such a good life, she whined. Why can't he just be happy? Of course he wasn't happy. He was stuck in that condo with her. He's an artist. You know how artists are these, really complicated people. He has to be complicated to make art. I met so many people like him in film school. I guess, she sighed. You know what would be really good? If you took him out to the club again. He loves being around people. He's really extroverted. But of course, Troy wasn't extroverted. He sat at the bar the entire time drinking his seltzers. When Jamie tried to get him to dance, he ignored her. Fuck it, she'd had enough, she said. She had tried everything to help him, and he was just being a depressed little shit, throwing himself a pity party. So he'd had a hard life. Everyone has hardships. For 2 months in the 4th grade, Jamie had been forced to wear orthodontic headgear. She'd had her heart broken by an investment banker's son had choked. Her friends had sometimes gotten so wasted that they'd thrown up in her hair. And look what she was doing. She was trying to make something of herself. And what was Troy doing? Just sitting on his album like some kind of loser who has no faith in himself. He turned to her, his eyes cold. So that's what you really think of me? His glare caught her off guard, but she was already committed to her tantrum. I think you're acting like a child. I think you don't know how to just take charge of your life. He sighed and shrugged on his coat. Fine then, he said. I'm leaving. Okay, fine, she shouted, slamming her purse on the bar. Go ahead and leave. I'm going to stay here and get my money's worth. I'm the one paying for everything anyway. She shouted this to his back. He was out the door and into the night, where I was sitting on the curb at the end of the block, waiting for him. That night, Jamie got drunk and cheated on Troy with a 30-something loan shark who'd helped finance the subprime mortgage crisis. When she got home the next morning, hungover and ashamed, Troy was sitting on the edge of their bed, his chin in his hands. She'd been the first person he trusted in a long time. He really believed things were going to work out with her, but she'd crossed a line and there was no going back. She fell to her knees and put her head in his lap and begged him to forgive her, to take her back. She would be better this time. She would be more understanding. No, he just couldn't trust her. She had already violated his trust once, after all. What was to keep her from violating it again? He was going to move out of the condo. No, he couldn't do that. Yes, he could. He opened their closet and began to pack up the clothes she'd bought him. She called me crying, "Thornton, please, he's going to leave me." Finally, the part I'd been waiting for. You cheated on him with someone disgusting, too. I didn't mean to, Thornton, seriously. I was so fucked up and confused. Can you say anything to him? Can you help him understand that I love him? I can't do anything to help him understand that, I said, trying to conceal the smile in my voice. It was your responsibility, and you completely fucked it up. He's been hurt enough in his life. Oh my God, Thornton, please, please. If you try to call this number again, I'll block you. But she did call, 26 times. She was used to getting her way. Then the text started coming in to both Orson and me. Why did this happen? Why did you do this to me? So I blocked her. We had moved Orson's recording equipment into our packed apartment, and were spending the afternoon trying to steal everything from the condo that wasn't nailed down. In the midst of this, the door burst open, and there he was, in leather gloves and a knee-length overcoat, his bear-like face stony. Jonathan DeCroix, her father. His eyes were narrower and his lips tighter than they'd ever looked in Jamie's Facebook photos. Which one of you is Troy? He asked both of us. When neither of us responded, he set his gaze on Orson, the obvious choice for his daughter. You're Troy? He asked. I'm his brother, Orson said quickly. Troy left town. Jonathan DeCroix pulled off his leather gloves, eyeing both of us. He was middle-aged but muscular, clearly well-preserved. Who's this? He asked, gesturing to me. I'm, Troy's brother's friend, I said, and I could hear Orson heaving a pointed sigh of frustration behind me. Alan. Somehow I don't believe you, Alan, he said. What I do believe is that you, he pointed at Orson, broke my daughter's heart. Fuck, whispered Orson, loud enough for only me to hear. And then too quickly Jonathan DeCroix was upon him, shoving him against the wall, delivering a quick but impactful blow to his stomach. It was horrifying to watch. I'm sorry, I said, hoping this would somehow fix things. But of course it didn't. Orson sunk to the floor, breathless. Get out, Jonathan DeCroix said, both of you, and give my daughter back everything that belongs to her. So we left. Orson stooped with his arm over my shoulder, our coats stealthily packed with silverware and gold fixtures. When we got back to our apartment, I helped Orson to his bed, where he collapsed, chest heaving. I sat next to him and kissed him on the forehead. I'm sorry, I said. He waved his hand at me. It's fine, we both fucked up in the moment. That didn't feel true, but I was grateful to him for saying it. Can I get you anything? He turned on his side, wincing in pain. Maybe some ice? I went to the kitchen and filled a bag with ice from the freezer. I thought of him shoved against the wall, the way his face had crumpled, the look of terror in his eyes. I never wanted him to feel that way again. In his bedroom, I held the ice against his stomach, and he squeaked out a high-pitched sigh and then closed his eyes, nodding as if I'd just made a very intelligent point. I need to sleep, he said, but do you think you can start unloading the stuff? I did. In a week, we made roughly $100,000 for the recording equipment and all of Orson's new clothes and shoes. I sent a $10,000 check to my parents that month. Don't worry about it, I told them when they texted me in panic. I got a raise. I'm the manager now.
That was wonderful.
Oh, I need my mic.
So thank you all for being here on this beautiful Minnesota evening. It is such a pleasure to be in conversation with you, Rafael. I just devoured this. It's so smart, so funny, and not that this is a measure of literary worth, but it feels really timely and relevant
Thank you.
to our current moment. So, as the title would indicate, Confidence is about two con men, Ezra and Orson, who meet as teenagers at a camp for juvenile delinquents and become friends, occasional lovers, and business partners. And we follow them over the course of several years as they concoct bigger and bigger scams and ultimately create a full-blown cult. And what's really striking to me about this book is that even when these guys are engaging in just completely immoral behavior, I was still like really rooting for them to get away with it. And I found myself thinking of the novel The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith, which this book has been very aptly compared to. And the way that Patricia Highsmith gets the reader to side with a character who is very much a complete sociopath, and the way in which she makes us as the reader almost complicit in his actions. And you're doing something very, very similar here. So I'm wondering if you could start us off by talking about the process of writing a novel about two anti-heroes and how, like, what craft elements and what craft decisions went into balancing villainy with sympathy.
Oh, yeah, an excellent question. So definitely The Talented Mr. Ripley was always in the back of my mind, Highsmith in general. And I was thinking of kind of like millennial con artists like Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, Billy McFarlane in the Fire Festival, Anna Delvey and all her great impersonations of rich people. And I was thinking, like, you know, these people are so fascinating to me. They're totally morally bankrupt, but they're compelling in their own way. And it's just kind of a delight to see people, you know, hacking capitalism and, you know, like making names for themselves in the process. And so even, you know, when these people are doing these kind of really morally objectionable things, I'm still thinking like, oh, you know, I kind of want you to make it, right? Not because I like what they're doing, right? But because it's so interesting and it has such narrative value for me. So I thought just like writing these two guys had its own kind of narrative momentum, and I had such enthusiasm for it that I ended up loving them. I mean, I loved them from the beginning, but I ended up loving everything they did, even though everything they did was so repugnant, you know?
Oh my God, yeah, I love them too. You know from the beginning that they don't get away with it, right? Because the novel opens with Ezra in prison, so we know from the beginning that it's not going to end well. But you, like, as a reader, I still found myself just really, really hoping that they can get as far as they possibly can without getting caught. And you've sort of led me to my next question, because I was also thinking about Elizabeth Holmes. I was also thinking about Anna Delvey. I feel like right now as a culture we're living through this like sort of collective fascination with scammers and grifters. So Elizabeth Holmes, for example, just Elizabeth Holmes alone, Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos, of course, has inspired this absolute tidal wave of like podcasts and books and TV shows and documentaries. So you've talked about why you as a writer are interested in sort of the narrative potential of scammers and grifters. I'm interested in hearing why you think we as a culture, and I think particularly we as Americans, have such an appetite for stories about con artists right now.
Definitely. So I think that the zeitgeist has become increasingly anti-capitalist. People have become increasingly aware as things are generally falling apart, infrastructurally speaking. People are becoming increasingly aware that the system isn't working. And so I think that in that awareness comes this understanding of the failures of the American dream. And there's like this tagline that it actually doesn't belong to me. It's part of a song, and I can't remember what song I stole it from, so I feel really bad about that. But the American dream is a pyramid scheme is sort of like the tagline for the book. And it really is true, you know, you're sold this kind of fantasy that you can like be born in America, or you can come to America, and you can, you know, if you work hard, you can get rich, you know, and live a life of comfort and ease, right? But what that ultimately looks like is, you know, Herbalife, right? It looks like an MLM. It looks like working and working and working to benefit people who are getting very rich off of you, and you're just being grounded to the ground. You know, you're just being grounded to a little nub. And so that therein lies this kind of Ponzi scheme, right? Where you are entreated to participate in a system that doesn't benefit you, benefits a very few. So I think that our fascination with grifters and con men probably comes from, like I said earlier, this like hacking of capitalism, this idea that like people are aware of the circumstances we live in and are doing their very best to are doing what they can to get what they want by operating outside of the system. And I wouldn't do that, you know. I hate the system, but I wouldn't do that because that like leaves such a nightmare damage trail in its wake, right? But I love learning about that. You know, I love kind of engaging with those narratives just because we are so discontented right now, and we want to live in this fantasy of like grifting the 1%. You know, taking it like Anna Delvey, right? Taking advantage of rich people. It feels like a good kind of story to, I don't know, to follow.
It's like, yeah, it's like almost this form of wish fulfillment.
Exactly.
Like, I want to do it, but I don't have the balls to. But it's
Exactly.
really great to watch someone else do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this novel is very much about, it's not about one con man, it's about two con men and how they work together and their dynamic and their, you know, their partnership, right? So this Confidence was reviewed a few days ago in the New York Times, very favorably, I might add. And the reviewer Jake Nevins writes, rarely do grifters act alone or purely in self-interest. The disgraced Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes was abetted in her $1 billion fraud by Sunny Balwani, her lover and more worldly co-conspirator, and Patricia Highsmith's Tom Ripley was compelled as much by his sublimated sexual attraction to Dickie Greenleaf as by his desire to inhabit Dickie's charmed life. So in Ezra and Orson, we sort of have this archetypal scammer duo. Ezra's really smart, but he's most comfortable kind of pulling the strings, being behind the scenes. He's almost this henchman figure. And Orson is the opposite. Orson is the public face of their operation. He's incredibly handsome. He's really charming. He's really great at manipulating people. And they work really well together as these business partners, but there's also this sexual and romantic element to their relationship. And in this sense, as this review points out, they're sort of embodying this other archetype of queer fiction where we've got this young, vulnerable, lonely gay man who falls under the spell of this Adonis, as you said, whose sexuality is kind of indeterminate. I have to confess that I read Orson as bi.
Thank you.
And that might just be like I'm bi and I'm always looking for like bi, you know, my literary bis, and I read him as that. But what is like undeniable is he sleeps with both men and women in order to get what he wants, right? So my next question is kind of twofold. To what extent do you think Orson genuinely cares about Ezra? Like, how much is he using him, and how much is he genuinely committed to their partnership, on the one hand? And so that's the first part of my question. The second part is kind of about Ezra and his self-delusion, right? He's really blinded, figuratively and literally. Like, over the course of the book, he's going blind. How did you think about writing a narrator who is blinded by his self-delusions and by his own unmet desires?
Oh my God, excellent question. So first of all, thank you so much for recognizing that Orson is bi. Orson's actually pan, technically speaking, but yes, like there were some reviewers saying like, oh, Ezra's fallen for the charms of a straight man. I'm like, yes, a straight man who consensually and willingly has sex with other men. Like, of course, a straight man. So, and there's, it's ridiculous, and there is for sure this kind of call me by your name, you know, he is the Army Hammer, right? He is the object of desire of the small kind of insecure boy, right? But I would say, like, these are two, adult men, right? And they're engaging in a relationship that, like I said, is highly consensual and does have an element of love in it, an element of romance in it. So I would say, like, Orson cares for Ezra. Orson cares for Ezra, but he gets in his own way. Because Orson's always looking for, the next, like, scheme, the next scam, right? The next payday. But he does care about Ezra. And I think that it's that kind of thwarted care, that thwarted desire that really makes Ezra's story kind of tragic, right? Because Ezra's there, ready for him, ready to be in love, ready to, do whatever it takes to get Orson to marry him, right? And Orson is kind of aloof. Well, not kind of, he's extremely aloof. And I think that Orson he's less of a love con man than he is a self-conning con man, right? He's kind of deluded himself into believing that this could never happen, and he can't get attached, and he can't be in love, right? So I would say that he really does care, and he does care, I think, more than people realize. And I won't give away the ending, but the ending, there's some care in the ending. There's some love there. So that would answer your first question. And remind me of your second question.
So my second question was, could you talk a little bit about what went into writing a first-person narrator who is deluded, who is self-deluded in a lot of ways, as smart as he is, and who is also blinded by his own, literally and figuratively by his own unmet desires, and how you sort of balance what we as the reader know to be true, and what Orson, sort of the reality of the novel, of what's happening in the novel, and then also what Ezra wants to believe, and what is actually true. I guess that was a kind of convoluted question.
No, it's an excellent question. I wanted this to be kind of Sophoclean in nature. I wanted it to be like a tragicomic story. And so, when we think of like the Greek tragedies, we do often think of that fall from grace, right? And I'm thinking, of course, of Oedipus Rex. When this guy finds out that he's killed his father and slept with his mother, he plucks his eyes out, right? People here are going to remember that I wrote a play at Carleton that had very similar themes. And this it sort of got repackaged into this novel. Emily knows. Yep, thank you. It sounds kind of familiar, yeah. Both this novel and that play were trying to talk, just like you're saying, about that kind of self-delusion and the moral blindness through the kind of tragicomic or maybe strictly tragic three-act structure. So I would say it wasn't difficult to write that kind of a narrator because I have been that kind of a narrator. I have been the person who's been totally self-deluded. I have been that person who's been wrapped up in desire, right? And who's been blind to the kind of side effects of being that way. So that felt, in a sense, a bit like a homecoming, weirdly enough. But yeah, the influences are there for sure. And I don't know, it was definitely kind of a pleasure to explore that side of things, to take that kind of twisted, dark, shameful feeling, right, of being in unrequited love, or of being completely, clueless about, like, what's happening and how your own desires are operating in the world, and putting that onto paper in a self-aware way, so I can actually dissect it, so I can explore it, instead of being wrapped up in living it.
It gives me hope also to know that you were able to take your juvenilia, your undergraduate work, and repackage it into really good literature. Makes me almost want to revisit my own undergraduate writing. So you mentioned earlier, you mentioned Herbalife. And that really struck me because, okay, so in the novel, Ezra and Orson start this company called New Life. New Life Herbalife. So it's a pyramid scheme, and then it eventually becomes kind of this cult. And what was really striking to me is that it really employs the language of wellness. So I'll give just, a small example. Early on in the novel, Orson is in this room full of, very rich women with too much time on their hands, and he's performing what he calls a synthesis, which is this, weird sort of hypnosis slash self-help slash kind of like therapy on a woman, and he tells her, he says, quote, "Synthesis brings your body and mind together. The darkness leaves your body." So that's a thing that I feel like I've probably heard in like a yoga or meditation class at some point, probably like almost verbatim. And in fact, like one of the things that this novel seems to be skewering is like not only like capitalism, the American dream, but also the wellness industry. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. Like, is wellness a scam? Is the industry the wellness industry a scam, or do you think it's more that capitalism itself is a scam and that it's promising spiritual fulfillment in exchange for money?
Oh, definitely. I mean, capitalism sort of terraforms everything good, right? So, like, you have this, maybe you'll have, like, Eastern medicine or these cultural practices that actually, like, non-Western cultural practices that actually do benefit people in, health-wise, right? And capitalism will take yoga, right? Or will take herbal medicine, or will take all this stuff and make it into something that's profitable, And so that, to me, the wellness industry is a great example of the wellness industry is a great example of good intentions gone very bad, because you have, or maybe not necessarily good intentions, but it's an example of a sort of an abuse or mistreatment of good intentions, right? A repackaging of good intentions into something that's been profitable, right? So you have the practice of yoga, which is very healing, and then you have on the other side Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop, telling people like, hey, you can put this jade egg somewhere, and like it'll cure you, it'll make you feel better, and you have like herbal medicine over here, and then you have Herbalife over here, so like you have this kind of terraforming process, and I think that the wellness industry is just like it's such a great it's just such a difficult thing for me to explicate, because it feels to me like there are all kinds of gurus. It feels to me like there are all kinds of people who will stand up and say, this is going to heal you, this is going to make you feel better, this is going to ultimately be what cures you, right? What cures your ailments. And these people are selling snake oil. These people are Orson, right? And these people are, promising you a product, really, ultimately. And that's something that I think definitely, with New Life and with this sort of spiritual fulfillment that's promised by synthesis, that's promised by this this sort of process of like returning to oneself, through paying some guy thousands and thousands of dollars, to help you return to yourself. I think it's just like, it's so typical. It happens so often. It's such a great example of, how this country works and how we make our money off of things that were once very good, and were once very helpful and healing, right? But have become something entirely different now.
It reminds me of the way that Orson leverages sort of his life story, which may or may not be true, about
right.
sort of pulling himself up by his bootstraps, right? Mm-hmm. Where it sort of it's this story that then becomes a vehicle through which to extract money from wealthy people, and also a way in which to like make people feel responsible for circumstances that are not of their own doing, right? So this is not your first novel. This is not your debut. Your first novel, The Come Down, came out in 2018, and this is maybe sort of a self-serving question because I am currently working on my second book. But how has it felt? How has writing and publishing this second novel felt different than your first one? Has the publishing industry, do you think, changed since The Come Down came out? How have you changed as a writer?
Gosh, yeah, I think The Come Down was something that The Come Down feels almost to me like it's held together with duct tape and paper clips, right? Because it's so voicey, it's so character-based, and I was writing my way into these characters and, exploring them, who they were, how they sound, so on and so forth, right? And I did that 13 times for 13 different people, and then looked up and was like, ooh, I don't have a plot. I've just written all these characters and I can't I can't find the plot here. So that wasn't then going through that process with my editor, figuring out where the plot was a huge part of that book. This book was tightly plotted from the beginning. It was plot, 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 plot. It's voicey because it's Ezra's voice, but I think when I saw kind of how The Come Down, how difficult it was for me to write, how many years it took, and how plotless it was. But there's nothing wrong with a plotless novel. I've read plenty of delicious plotless novels, but it wasn't what I wanted for my second book. So when I kind of had that experience and kind of processed it, I was like, God, I really want to get from point A to point B in a way that feels snappy, fun, feels like a caper, it's like a crime novel, right? And so that's what I did for Confidence. And I would say that the publishing landscape, it's changed insofar as every year publishing gets increasingly dedicated to uplifting marginalized voices. Every single year we see more writers of color, we see more queer writers, we see more trans writers on the scene, which is lovely. And so it's only changed for the good, right? And I think as a queer and trans person, even more accepted by the publishing scene than I was before. When I was writing the first book, it was under my dead name. I was supposedly cis, of all that whole jazz, and I felt ill at ease in that capacity. So having something tightly plotted, having something very voicey, and being myself while writing it really opened some doors for me, and the landscape, as well, really opened some doors for me. So it actually felt a lot easier. I think I told you this upstairs. It felt a lot easier.
Yeah, and that's something that I've often heard the opposite. So that's that's so wonderful to hear. So it reads as absolutely incredibly tightly plotted. I raced through it. I read it probably a day and a half. Did you know what was going to happen from the beginning? Did you outline ahead of time?
Yeah, I get that question often, and I tried to outline, and I went through several different kind of beat sequences, this happens, this happens, this happens, and threw several of those away. But yes, short answer, I ultimately did outline the book. I just knew so the prologue where it starts out with them in prison, I wanted that to be a record scratch moment, whoa, how did we get here, kind of thing. And so the book shows you how we arrived at that point B from point A. And yeah, it was definitely just sort of that outline that I was writing off of that I finally settled on after, so many that didn't work.
So do we have audience questions?
I'm interested in how you wrote the marks, the rich people, the targets.
Yeah, definitely. And so basically, this is this wild phenomenon, and I think it's a great landscape for grifters right now, because rich people can be persuaded to put their money towards almost anything, almost any kind of absurd thing, which is to go back to Goop, right? Like, the jade egg is a great example, or, like, ayahuasca, let's go on this expensive ayahuasca retreat to cure postpartum depression, and, like, let's, like, manipulate native people into, like, doing this, like, for us, right? And so, I feel like the Marks were both very rich and very naive, and I think wealth can make one naive. I think that you can kind of start to believe in anything if you have the money to throw at it, essentially. So I wrote these people kind of with that in mind. One of the Marks is the wife of a wealthy oil magnate, who, like, throws her money at, like, niche, like, libertarian presidential candidates, and, like, wants to, like, build some kind of horrible weight loss camp in Papua New Guinea or something, like awful stuff, like really messed up stuff. And she was actually a delight to write, because there are so many people like her, you know what I mean? And the other Marks in the book, I think, came from, like I said, the headlines, and came from sort of my own whimsy. Yeah.
So in the beginning, you've got a lot of references to, like, primary source material, Russian authors, and etc. that are just, like, giving us a good glimpse into how these characters think. How important is it for you to know that source material that you're referencing?
Yeah, it felt very important. Like, the Brothers Karamazov, definitely. I was like kind of reading it as I was writing this, and the two felt so unrelated until I was, like, exploring the character of Alyosha, and the kind of, like, that wanting to be good, that intense wanting to be good, and intense kind of like grasping at innocence that's, like, unavailable to him, like, is no longer available to him, right? And I thought that if Ezra was sort of, like, grafting his personality onto that character, right, that would be kind of amusing, because this guy, there's no way for this guy to be good. Like, this guy's already committed to a life of crime, So it felt important to me to kind of be familiar with that, be familiar with the books they were reading, right? Orson is a huge fan of like, Virginia Woolf and Toni Morrison. Like, it's so unlikely that he would, like, someone like this would actually be reading, To the Lighthouse, but, like, here he is. And I think that for me, like, that source material, like, well, I guess novels in general, fiction in general, gives you such great insight into, I mean, we all know this, we all have read this, but, like, gives you such great insight into the human condition, obviously, right, into how people think. And if you are a con artist, then you can take that material, right, and use it to understand how people think and make it beneficial to you, right? Use that information, that knowledge to your benefit, right? Instead of having, like, this pleasant aesthetic experience, you're like, oh, this is how I can manipulate people. This is how people work, right? So, yeah, I think that reading that literature as a con artist would was actually very fun. I don't know what this says about me. I had so much fun. Like, I just had so much fun writing these guys, and pretending to be them.
I was gonna ask, what is one thing that you learned from Ezra and one thing that you learned from Orson? Is there anything that you want to incorporate into your own life that you learned writing them? even if mostly they're, like, not the best people.
Yeah. That's such a good question. Well, for Orson, obviously, the title of the book, I would like to have his confidence, right? Like, I would like to have his assertiveness, I think he lacks self-awareness in some capacities, but he has it very intensely in others. And I like how much he loves himself. I don't like that he's a narcissist. I don't want to be a narcissist, you know what I mean? But I do want to like cultivate self-love in some capacity, right? And I think that like symbolically speaking, Orson kind of stands for that, right? Someone who like, you know, yeah, buys his own bullshit, but if we were to interpret that generously, right, he follows through on his vision, you know, he like has a plan and he can do it and he's confident about it. And Ezra, I think, Ezra, I didn't like really learn from him so much as I saw myself in him, and I think I wanted to, I kind of wanted to use him as a foil for myself, right? Like he is so similar to me at one point in my life, and how can I observe those similarities, explore similarities, and be different, you know? So how can I make him into that foil where he was once so similar? So that's kind of what I learned from the two of them, I would say, yeah.
More? Do we have one more?
Other questions? All right, then I will ask one final question. So you recently sold a movie option for your first novel, which is very exciting. This reads to me like it should absolutely be a prestige HBO series. Who would play Orson and Ezra?
Amazing question, such a good question. I actually was in conversation with a producer over the summer who was like, Harry Styles should play Orson. And at first,
Harry Styles, that's an interesting
I
choice.
know, I was like, wow, okay. And at first I was like, oh, I hate that. And then like I thought about it and I was like, ooh, I love it. Yeah, this is actually really good. This is a good idea. And then I thought like, I saw that movie Harry Styles was in where he like simulates a whole like 1950s suburban existence.
Oh, Don't Worry, Darling.
Don't Worry, Darling. Yes, thank you. And I was like, oh man, maybe he could also play Ezra. So my answer to your question is quite simply Harry Styles. Harry Styles. That's how I feel.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much.